Dad pointed at me and said, "You're the only one with a good job. You should pay for your sister's college." Mom nodded. "It's the least you can do after everything we've done for you." My sister smirked. "Yeah, you owe us." I calmly put my glass down and said, "Funny, because I just paid off your entire mortgage and was planning to surprise you. I, 32M, just found out what my family really thinks of me." I sat at the dinner table, fork halfway to my mouth, when my father's words hit me like a slap across the face. He pointed directly at me and declared that I was the only one with a good job, so I should pay for my sister's college tuition. The entire room went silent for a moment before my mother chimed in, nodding eagerly as she reminded me it was the least I could do after everything they'd done for me. Then my sister, 20 years old and sitting there with this smug expression, added that I owed them. I slowly placed my glass down on the table, the sound of it meeting the wood somehow louder than it should have been. I told them it was funny they should mention what I owe, because just 3 days ago, I'd paid off their entire mortgage and had been planning to surprise them with the news tonight. The silence that followed was deafening. Let me back up and explain how I got here, sitting at my childhood dining table, wondering how my family had become people I barely recognized. Growing up, I was always the responsible one. My sister was the baby, the one who could do no wrong, the one who got away with everything. When she failed classes, it was the teacher's fault. When she wrecked Mom's car at 17, it was the other driver's fault even though she'd been texting. When she got fired from her part-time job for showing up late repeatedly, the manager was just being unreasonable. I, on the other hand, worked 2 jobs through high school to save for college. I studied every night, maintained a 3.9 GPA, and got a partial scholarship to a state school. My parents contributed what they could, which wasn't much, and I took out loans for the rest. I graduated with $40,000 in debt and a degree in software engineering. The past 10 years had been a grind. I worked my way up from a junior developer position to a senior software architect at a major tech company. I lived in a modest apartment, drove a used car, and saved aggressively. Last year, I finally paid off my student loans. This year, I'd been able to put away enough to make a significant financial move. 3 months ago, my parents mentioned they were struggling with their mortgage payments. Dad's health had declined, forcing him into early retirement, and Mom's part-time bookkeeping job wasn't enough to cover the gap. They were stressed, worried about losing the house they'd lived in for 35 years. I saw an opportunity to do something meaningful. I called the bank, got the payoff amount, and started the process. It took 12 weeks to finalize everything, but I managed to pay off the remaining $147,000 they owed. The plan was to tell them tonight at dinner, to see the relief on their faces, to finally give back after all those years of them doing their best for me. Then my sister announced 2 weeks ago that she'd been accepted to a private university for a degree in marketing. The tuition was $60,000 a year. She'd applied without discussing it with anyone, hadn't bothered to apply for scholarships or consider community college first, and expected the family to figure it out. My parents had been buzzing about it ever since, trying to work out the numbers, stressing about loans and payment plans. I'd stayed quiet, thinking maybe she'd come to her senses and choose a more affordable option. She had options. A decent state school had accepted her with a small scholarship. But she wanted the private university because her friends were going there. So there we were at dinner, my mother's pot roast getting cold, when my father made his declaration. I should pay because I was the only one with a good job. My mother looked at me expectantly, reminding me of every sacrifice they'd made. The times they drove me to school events. The birthday presents. The roof over my head. As if children should spend their adult lives repaying their parents for basic parenting. My sister sat there, barely suppressing a grin, telling me I owed them. I shared my news about the mortgage calmly, watching their faces shift from smug expectation to confusion to something that looked almost like anger. My father asked me to repeat myself. I did, slower this time, explaining that I'd contacted their bank, paid off the entire mortgage balance, and the deed was now free and clear. They'd receive the paperwork in a few days. My mother's mouth opened and closed like a fish. My sister's smirk vanished. My father asked why I hadn't told them. I explained I wanted it to be a surprise, a thank you for everything they'd done for me. I'd been planning this moment for months, imagining tears of joy and gratitude. Instead, I was sitting here being told I should do more. My mother recovered first, her expression shifting to something calculating. She said that was wonderful, truly generous. But I clearly had money to spare, so helping with my sister's tuition shouldn't be a problem. The mortgage was already paid. What difference would it make to help family? I felt something cold settle in my chest. I asked her if she was seriously sitting there, moments after learning I'd just given them a $147,000 gift, asking for more. My sister jumped in, saying it wasn't the same thing. The house was for them, but her education was an investment in her future. Besides, I didn't have kids or a wife. What was I spending my money on? I could afford it. I took a long breath. I told them I could afford a lot of things. I could afford to pay for her college, buy them a new car, fund their retirement. But the question wasn't what I could afford. It was what I was willing to do for people who saw me as a wallet instead of a son and brother. My father's face reddened. He said I was being selfish and ungrateful. After everything they'd done, this was how I repaid them? By throwing money in their faces and refusing to help my sister? I reminded him that I'd just paid off their mortgage. That wasn't throwing money in anyone's face. That was generosity. And I'd done it expecting nothing in return, certainly not to be told it wasn't enough. My sister started crying, claiming I was ruining her life. All her friends were going to that university. She'd already told everyone she was going. How could I do this to her? I asked her why she felt entitled to $60,000 a year of my money. She was an adult now. I'd paid my own way through college. Why was she any different? Because the family helped each other, my mother said firmly. That's what families did. I pointed out that helping each other went both ways. When had any of them helped me? When I was working 2 jobs in high school, had they offered to reduce my workload? When I was drowning in student loans, had they offered to contribute anything? When I pulled 80-hour weeks to get promoted, had they checked in to see if I was okay? They were silent. I continued, my voice level but my hands shaking slightly. I told them I'd spent the last decade building a career while they'd spent that same time making excuses for my sister. She'd dropped out of community college twice. She'd never held a job for more than 6 months. She had no concept of money management or personal responsibility. And now they wanted me to fund 4 years at a private university for someone who demonstrated zero commitment to education? My father said I was being cruel. She'd matured. This was her chance to turn things around. I asked him why her chance required my money. The dinner ended badly. My sister locked herself in her room. My mother told me I was being spiteful. My father said he was disappointed in the man I'd become. I left without dessert. Update 1. I didn't sleep much that night. I kept replaying the conversation, wondering if I was the one being unreasonable. By morning, I'd received texts from both parents and my sister. My mother wanted to know if I'd thought about what she'd said. My father sent a long message about family obligations and how disappointed my grandparents would be if they knew how selfish I was being. My sister sent a simple message asking if I was really going to let her dreams die because I was too cheap to help. I blocked all 3 numbers. That afternoon, I called my attorney. I wanted to understand the legal implications of the mortgage payoff and ensure there were no strings attached that my parents could manipulate. He confirmed the deed was clear and there was nothing they could do to reverse the transaction. Then I asked him about something else that had been nagging at me. When I paid off the mortgage, I'd received access to the payment history. I'd noticed something odd. There had been a significant refinance 5 years ago that increased their loan balance by $30,000. I asked my attorney if there was a way to find out what that money had been used for. He made some calls. 2 days later, he called me back. The $30,000 had been withdrawn as cash, ostensibly for home improvements. My attorney had a contact at the county assessor's office who confirmed no permits had been pulled for any renovations during that period. The money had simply vanished. I had a feeling I knew where it went. I drove to my parents' house unannounced on Saturday morning. I knocked on the door until my father answered, looking annoyed that I'd shown up. I walked past him into the living room where my mother was watching television. My sister was presumably still asleep. It was 10:30 in the morning, after all. I asked them about the refinance. The color drained from my mother's face. My father tried to bluster, asking what I was talking about, but I could see the panic in his eyes. I told them I knew about the $30,000. I wanted to know where it went. My mother started crying immediately, which told me everything. My father sat down heavily on the couch, his anger deflating into something that looked like shame. Finally, he admitted it. 5 years ago, my sister had met someone online. He was older, charming, and had convinced her to invest in some cryptocurrency scheme. She'd begged our parents for money, crying about missing out on a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. They'd been hesitant, but she'd been so convincing, so certain. They gave her $30,000 from the refinance. The cryptocurrency was fake. The man disappeared. The money was gone. I stood there, processing this information. They'd refinanced their house, the house I'd just paid off, to give my sister $30,000 for an obvious scam. And they'd never told me. I asked why they kept it secret. My mother sobbed that they were ashamed. They knew I'd be angry. They knew I'd judge them for being so foolish. I asked if my sister had ever paid back a single dollar. Silence. I asked if she'd even apologized. More silence. I walked upstairs and knocked on my sister's door. She told me to go away. I opened it anyway. She was lying in bed, scrolling through her phone. She looked up at me with annoyance and asked what I wanted. I asked her about the $30,000. Her face went pale. She sat up, immediately defensive, telling me it wasn't her fault. She'd been fooled. She was a victim. How could she have known it was a scam? I asked if she'd tried to pay our parents back. She said she didn't have that kind of money. I pointed out she'd worked various jobs over the past 5 years. Even minimum wage, if she'd saved aggressively, she could have made a dent in it. She said it wasn't fair to expect her to pay back money she'd lost. It was gone. What was the point? I asked if she understood that I'd just paid off a mortgage that was $30,000 higher because of her stupidity. She called me an asshole and told me to get out of her room. I went back downstairs. My parents were huddled together on the couch, looking small and old. I told them I needed time to think. I left before any of them could respond. Update 2. I spent the next week doing research. I looked into the university my sister wanted to attend, her academic history, her work history, everything. I created a spreadsheet detailing every financial decision my family had made that I could verify. The pattern was clear. My sister had been enabled her entire life. Every mistake was forgiven, every consequence avoided. My parents had bankrupted themselves emotionally and financially trying to smooth her path, and she'd learned nothing from any of it. I called my attorney again and asked about setting up a trust or some kind of educational fund with strict parameters. He explained the options. After a long discussion, I made a decision. I sent my parents and sister an email. I wasn't ready to see them in person. I explained that I'd done a lot of thinking about family obligations and what helping really meant. I told them I would pay for my sister's college education, but with conditions. She would attend the state school that had accepted her, not the private university. She would live at home to save on housing costs. She would maintain a 3.5 GPA or higher. She would work part-time during the school year and full-time during summers, contributing 20% of her earnings to her education costs. She would meet with a financial counselor monthly to learn money management. She would write me a detailed quarterly report on her progress, both academic and personal. If she met these conditions, I would pay her tuition and books for 4 years. If she failed to meet any condition, the funding would stop immediately, and she would be responsible for her own education costs going forward. Additionally, I told them I'd created a spreadsheet documenting the $30,000 refinance and how it impacted the mortgage I'd paid off. I wasn't asking for repayment, but I wanted it acknowledged. I wanted my sister to understand that her choices had consequences that affected everyone. I also told my parents that I needed space. Their immediate response to my generosity, demanding more, had damaged our relationship. I loved them, but I needed them to understand that love didn't mean unlimited financial support, especially when it was taken for granted. The email was long, detailed, and took me 3 hours to write. I read it over a dozen times before sending it. Then I closed my laptop and waited. My sister responded first. She sent a furious email calling me controlling, manipulative, and cruel. How dare I put conditions on helping her? Real family didn't attach strings. I was punishing her for one mistake she'd made years ago. The state school was beneath her. She deserved better. I didn't respond. My mother's email came next. She was disappointed in me. Family helped unconditionally. These requirements were excessive and showed I didn't trust my sister. She'd matured so much recently. Couldn't I see that? Forcing her to live at home and work would ruin her college experience. I didn't respond to her either. My father's email arrived last, 2 days after I'd sent mine. It was shorter than I expected. He said he understood why I was hurt. He admitted they'd been unfair at dinner. He acknowledged that they'd enabled my sister too much over the years. He agreed my conditions were reasonable, even if my mother and sister didn't. He asked if I'd reconsider the space issue. He wanted to talk in person. I thought about it for another day before responding. I told him I'd meet him for coffee, just the two of us, the following weekend. Update 3. My father arrived at the coffee shop looking older than I remembered. We ordered our drinks and sat in the back corner where it was quiet. For a few minutes, neither of us spoke. He finally broke the silence, telling me he was sorry. Not just for the dinner, but for years of putting my sister first. He said they'd always known I'd be okay, that I was responsible and capable. My sister needed more help, or so they'd thought. Somewhere along the way, helping had turned into enabling, and they'd been too close to see it. He told me my mother was struggling with my email. She saw it as an attack on her parenting. But he'd been thinking about what I'd written, and he couldn't disagree with any of it. He asked me if I remembered a conversation we'd had when I was 16. I didn't. He reminded me that I'd come home from work one night, exhausted from pulling a double shift at the grocery store, and found my sister crying because she'd failed her driving test for the third time. My parents had been consoling her, promising they'd pay for more lessons, assuring her it wasn't her fault. I'd looked at all of them and asked a simple question. When was she going to be held accountable for anything? My father said he'd dismissed it at the time, told me I was being too harsh. But that question had haunted him over the years. I'd been right, even then. I asked him why he'd never said anything before now. He admitted he'd been a coward. It was easier to keep the peace than confront the problem. My mother had always been protective of my sister, and he'd gone along with it. They'd convinced themselves they were being good parents by supporting her through everything. They'd failed to see they weren't supporting her. They were crippling her. I asked him if my sister would accept my conditions. He sighed deeply. He said she was furious right now, but she'd have to accept them because there was no other option. They couldn't pay for her college. She had no savings. She hadn't qualified for significant financial aid because of their income and assets that included a now paid-off house worth $400,000. He admitted something else too. My mother had already been looking into taking out a personal loan to cover the first year's tuition at the private university. She'd been declined by 3 banks. Their debt-to-income ratio was too high even without a mortgage payment because of credit card debt I hadn't known about. I asked how much they owed on credit cards. $23,000. I closed my eyes. I asked what it was from. He listed items slowly, shamefully. My sister's car insurance after her 3rd accident. Medical bills from when she'd gotten sick 2 years ago and refused to go to urgent care, waiting until it was an emergency room situation. Her laptop. Her phone. Clothes. Concert tickets. Spring break trips. 1,000 small indulgences that added up. I asked if she knew about this debt. He shook his head. I told him she needed to know. Part of growing up was understanding the impact of your choices on the people who loved you. If she was going to become a responsible adult, she needed to see the full picture of what enabling her had cost the family. He agreed, but asked me not to cut them out completely. He understood I needed space, but he hoped we could rebuild eventually. I told him I hoped so too, but that would depend on what happened next. If my sister refused my conditions, I'd know where everyone's priorities truly lay. If she accepted them but didn't follow through, same result. But if she genuinely tried, if she showed real growth and appreciation, then maybe we could find our way back to being a family. We finished our coffee in more comfortable silence. When we stood to leave, my father hugged me, the first real hug in years. He told me he was proud of me, and that he should have said that more often. I watched him walk to his car, shoulders slumped, carrying the weight of years of mistakes. I felt sorry for him, but I also felt something like hope. 3 days later, my sister sent me a new email. It was shorter, less angry, though still resentful. She said she'd accept my conditions, but wanted me to know she wasn't happy about it. She felt like I was punishing her instead of helping her. I responded for the first time since my original email. I told her I was helping her, just not in the way she wanted. Real help meant preparing someone for the world as it actually existed, not sheltering them from consequences. I told her I believed she could succeed if she actually tried, but that belief wasn't the same as blind faith. I wished her luck and told her I looked forward to her first quarterly report. That was 6 weeks ago. Classes started 2 weeks ago. My sister is attending the state university, living at home, and working 15 hours a week at a campus bookstore. My mother is barely speaking to me. My father sends occasional updates. According to him, my sister complained constantly for the first week. The school was beneath her. Her roommate, she'd decided to live in the dorms after all, paying for it with her bookstore earnings and a small supplemental payment I'd agreed to, was annoying. The classes were too hard. The job was boring. Then something shifted. She met someone in her marketing fundamentals class. Another student who was working full-time and going to school part-time, supporting herself completely. They became study partners. My sister mentioned this person in passing to my father, noting that she complained a lot, but this other student never did, even though she had way more to deal with. My father said it was the first time he'd heard my sister compare herself to someone and come up short in her own assessment. Last week, I received her first monthly financial counselor report. She'd been resistant to the sessions at first, but the counselor had apparently done something unexpected. Instead of lecturing her, he'd asked her to calculate exactly how much the $30,000 cryptocurrency loss had cost our parents over the 5 years in refinance interest and higher mortgage payments. The number was $42,000. My sister had called my father, crying, asking if that was true. He confirmed it. Her next session with the counselor, she'd asked to create a long-term repayment plan. Even if it took 10 years, she wanted to pay them back. The counselor helped her understand compound interest, debt prioritization, and realistic goal setting. She now had a plan: finish college, get a job in her field, live frugally, and dedicate a portion of her income to repayment. My father forwarded me all of this information with a simple message asking if I could talk to her. I called her last night. The conversation was awkward at first. She thanked me stiffly for paying her tuition. Then she apologized, and it sounded genuine. She said she'd been selfish and entitled. She'd assumed I owed her something just because we were family, never thinking about what I might have sacrificed to be in a position to help anyone. She told me about her study partner, about the financial counseling, about seeing the real cost of her mistakes laid out in spreadsheets. She said she understood now why I'd set conditions, even if she still didn't love them. I told her I was proud of her for sticking with it, and that I meant it. She asked if we could have coffee sometime, just the two of us, so she could properly thank me. I told her I'd like that. We haven't set a date yet. I'm not rushing. But for the first time in months, I feel like maybe I made the right choice. Not the easy choice, the right one. My family isn't fixed. My mother is still distant, still convinced I'm being unnecessarily harsh. My sister is still at the beginning of a long journey toward responsibility. My father is trying to navigate between everyone, playing peacemaker as always. But there's movement. There's growth. There's a chance. I paid off my parents' mortgage because I loved them and wanted to help. That hasn't changed. But I've learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable. Sometimes help looks like conditions and boundaries. Sometimes generosity means teaching someone to fish rather than giving them the fish. I don't know how this story ends. Maybe my sister will complete college and pay back every dollar she owes. Maybe she'll slip back into old patterns. Maybe my relationship with my mother will heal, or maybe it won't. But I know I made the right call at that dinner table. When I was told I wasn't doing enough, when my $147,000 gift was dismissed as insufficient, I stood my ground. And that's worth more than any amount of money I could have given them.